What if I told you that one of the most advanced tech nations in the world is the size of a fingernail on the global map? That while Silicon Valley gets the spotlight or even peace, but it turned every disadvantage into dominance. A desert nation under constant threat quietly powers your GPSs, your smartphone chips. What made Israel's people refugees, Holocaust survivors, immigrants, war-torn families emerged not as victims of history, but inventors of the future. Your medical devices, even your digital banking security. Why do graduates of an elite Israeli military unit become global the secretive minds behind cyberweapons, and the cultural pressure that says, fail fast, move faster? What does Unit 8200 even mean? And why does every tech investor want to hire its alumni? And what if I told you this nation wasn't blessed with oil, forests, and possibly change how you view the role of technology in national survival? This is the story of Israel, the tiny country that outcoded giants, outsmarted armies, rise into the future as a tech superpower, from missiles to microchips, and out-innovated empires. Could it be that survival demanded more than courage? It demanded code, computation, and creation. But how did it all begin? Why is Israel home to more tech startups per person than the US, China, or Europe? Why Tel Aviv became the new tech capital of the Middle East? And why Intel, Apple, and Google didn't just visit, they stayed? Could it be that war created a culture of innovation? In this deep dive, you're about to witness a transformation like no other. From battlegrounds to boardrooms, we'll expose the hidden web of Israel's defense tech. You'll discover how kids in Israeli high schools build drones. You'll meet soldiers who became software engineers, physicists who built billion-dollar startups, and entire cities built on data, not oil. But it's not all glorious. There's controversy too. Questions of surveillance, military ethics, and the digital arms race swirl around Israel's dominance. Yet through it all, one question remains. How did a nation built on ashes and war? So buckle up, because what you're about to see will challenge your assumptions, rewrite your ideas about power. This is not just Israel's story, it's a blueprint for what happens when necessity becomes innovation, and when innovation becomes unstoppable. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, it was instantly surrounded. 5 Arab nations attacked simultaneously, and the newborn country had no standing army, barely any weapons, and a population made of refugees and Holocaust survivors. So how did it survive? And more importantly, how did it win? In a world of oil-rich neighbors, Israel had no natural resources, no established economy, no factories, just sheer will. But from the very beginning, necessities birthed invention. Farmers designed irrigation systems in the desert. Engineers scavenged scrap metal to build homemade weapons. And the government made a bold decision. If the nation could not outnumber its enemies, it would outthink them. This mindset became doctrine. Israel's first prime ministers didn't just talk about survival. They poured funding into science, research, and defense tech. Universities became weapons labs. Kibbutzim, those communal farms, weren't just growing food. They were innovating drip irrigation, a technology now used in 100+ countries. But here's the hidden truth. Israel's earliest innovations weren't for export. They were for war. And by the 1960s, Israel's defense ministry was working with scientists on computer-guided systems, decades before most countries even had mass computing. And when the world denied Israel weapons, the country created its own arms industry, learning to revert radios, radars, surveillance, tools, all built not to grow a tech empire, but to survive annihilation. In the 1950s, engineers began developing what would later become Israel's defense electronics sector. Why was this so important? Because survival meant being smarter, faster, and more connected than any enemy. Israel, just 2 decades into existence, had already laid the seeds for a culture of accelerated innovation. While other countries were building GDPs with trade, Israel was building code behind bunkers. The national trauma of the Holocaust and the memory of near extinction were burned into the national psyche. And innovation became a shield. Every boy and girl knew they'd serve in the army. Every parent knew the price of failure was existential. So what happens when survival depends, not on luck, but on how fast you can invent the future? And could the very conditions designed to destroy it be what made it unstoppable? This was not Silicon Valley glamour. This was trench-style technology, improvised, rugged, efficient, and every breakthrough carried the weight of life and death. That's why by 1967, when war erupted again, Israel's technological edge helped it defeat several armies in 6 days. But ask yourself this: was this brilliance or desperation? Is it possible that pressure, not privilege, created Israel's edge? Imagine joining the military not to carry a rifle, but to write code that could stop a missile midair, or to build software that could hack an enemy network from a darkroom. Underground intelligence units on Earth, Unit 8200. And how did it become the most elite tech school no university can match? Formed in the early 1950s under absolute secrecy, Unit 8200 was Israel's response to a brutal truth. Now imagine you're only 18. That est the reality for thousands of young Israelis, selected for one of the most secretive and powerful military and later cracked open the digital world years before most countries even understood it. It started as a small signal intelligence group, but quickly evolved into something far more powerful. A cyber intelligence. In the US, a 20-year-old might still be figuring out college majors, but what is Unit 8200? Working on real-time battlefield AI or disrupting global terror networks with nothing but a laptop. It's rapid-fire decision-making in the fog of cyber war. In war, information isn't power, it's survival. Because if you were in 8200, your resume already includes real-world ops, more intense than any startup sprint, and technical mastery. And they go on to found companies that shape the world. That's why the IDF invests heavily in technology, not just to defend a country, but to fuel its economy. Superforce that monitored phone lines, intercepted enemy communications, broke encrypted codes, startups, strengthened defense. Critics have accused former 8200 members of exporting surveillance technology to authoritarian regimes, of blurring the lines between war tech and civil tech. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that produces results. Built by 8200 alumni. Heard of Checkpoint Software, the cybersecurity giant protecting governments worldwide? That too. But what makes it so different? In Israel, a 20-year-old in Unit 8 already be leading a team of programmers. Ask yourself, was this built in Silicon Valley or inside a military bunker outside Tel Aviv? And more importantly, is the future of tech no longer in universities, but in war rooms? And in the world of cyber conflict, Israel stands not just as a participant, but as a pioneer. These teenagers are given access to cutting-edge tools, data, satellites, and most importantly, trust. They don't enter the workforce, they redefine it. The Israeli army empowers young minds to take initiative, break rules, experiment, even fail, as long as they learn fast. There's no waiting for seniority, no permission layers. And when these young operatives leave the military after just a few years of service, they bring with them a mindset of resilience, extreme responsibility. Ever used Waze to skip traffic? Facial recognition, fintech, drone, defense systems, anti-fraud AI. So many innovations link back to former 8200 minds. But it's not just the talent, it's the pipeline. Venture capitalists in Tel Aviv don't look at Ivy League degrees, they ask one question. Which unit were you in? This unit has become an unofficial incubator, and the government knows it. This is the tech-military loop that no other country has mastered so effectively. Defense creates training. Training creates innovation. Innovation builds startups. But this raises uncomfortable questions. Should warfare train entrepreneurs? Is a nation's security a fair entry point into And what happens when those tools built in secrecy for national defense leak into private companies? But defenders say that's the price of excellence, and Israel's enemies don't fight fair. So neither can its innovators. The line between war and code has already disappeared. So next time you see a life-saving AI, a fraud detection tool, or a drone dodging rockets in the sky, by the 1980s, Israel had already proven it could survive. But now, it wanted to thrive. With military innovation pumping out talent, the question became, how do you turn warriors into entrepreneurs? Israel had inflation nearing 400%, rising unemployment, and a brain drain of its best minds. The answer came in waves. From economic necessity to government foresight, in 1985, Israel signed a free trade agreement with the US's first, and soon after, launched a national transformation plan. But instead of collapsing, the country pivoted. But the real explosion came in the 1990s. Why? Because of two unexpected shocks. The immigration of over 1 million Jews from the collapsing Soviet Union, many of them scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, and the global rise of the internet, and they weren't afraid of failing. Because in Israel, failure wasn't taboo. In fact, if you hadn't failed once, you probably weren't trying hard enough. Suddenly, Israel had a surplus of brain power, but not enough jobs to absorb them. So what did they do? They created their own companies, with limited local market. Every Israeli startup was born thinking global. This cultural fearlessness, paired with elite military experience and global hunger, lit the match. But there was still one piece missing. Capital and government incentives were fueling R&D labs at a national level. Suddenly Tel Aviv and Herzliya were buzzing with American and European investors looking for the next big thing. And that came in 1993, when Israel launched Yusma, a government-backed venture capital fund that changed everything. They wanted global exit. For every dollar foreign VCs invested, the Israeli government matched it and gave them the option to buy out the government's stake at a discount. It was free money essentially, and the world took notice. Maybe it was the emotional residue of generational trauma that demanded success, not for ego, but for security. So how did this tiny, conflict-ridden country earn the title Startup Nation? Was it just luck, military, and talent, or was it something deeper? Israeli entrepreneurs now trained in 8,200 and armed with Soviet math, were building cybersecurity tools, chipsets, communications, software, and they didn't care about local fame. That's why Israeli companies don't wait to scale domestically. They launch in America, Europe, or Asia from day one. Because when your home market is just 9 million people, you think global by default. By the late 1990s, companies like Checkpoint Software others had sold to Cisco, Microsoft, and Intel, and the startup scene was exploding. But this wasn't random, it was systematic. Israeli high schools were teaching robotics, army units were coding it. Between 1991 and 2000, Israeli tech exports grew from $1.6 billion to over $12 billion, a 650% increase. And through all this, one thing stayed constant: the fusion of brains, urgency, and boldness. A young Israeli founder wasn't just pitching an app. They were pitching survival, and global VCS loved it. They said Israelis were the hungriest, scrappiest, most stubborn founders they'd ever met, because for them, nothing came easy. And yet, despite wars, recessions, and geopolitical chaos, Israel kept launching. Maybe it was the culture of questioning authority. Maybe it was the mix of chaos and community. Whatever it was, by the early 2000s, one thing was clear: Israel wasn't just surviving anymore, it was building the future. It's one thing to build local startups, but how did Israel, a country barely the size of New Jersey, convince the world's most powerful tech companies, Google, Intel, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, to set up shop just miles from a war zone? Why would Silicon Valley's giants risk billions in a region where rocket sirens still ring out at night? So innovative and so relentless that the world had no choice but to pay attention. The answer lies in a rare convergence of genius, grit, and geography. Israel didn't beg these giants to come. It built a tech ecosystem so fierce. Welcome to Silicon Wadi, the stretch of coastal land between Tel Aviv, Herzliya, and Haifa that became one of the most advanced tech corridors on Earth. But why there? What's so special about Israeli soil that makes it grow unicorns? In fact, Intel's first international R&D center was in Israel, not India, not China, not Germany. It starts with talent. The average Israeli developer doesn't just know how to code. They know how to think under pressure. Intel Israel invented key parts of the Pentium chip and led the design of Intel S-Core series processors, the brains behind most of the world SPCs, leading chaos, and ship products with military-grade discipline. They opened their first R&D center outside the US in Herzliya. They're battlefield-hardened, mission-driven innovators trained in places like Unit 8200, Talpiot. So when Intel came scouting in the 1970s, adapts better and integrates more deeply into worldwide systems. These aren't just software engineers. You don't go to Israel to build another app. You go there to solve problems no one else can. And Mamroom elite military programs where failure can mean national disaster. They didn't just see cheap labor, they saw the future. And over the decades, that bet paid off. Acquired Israeli startups to power its cloud and AI systems. Because its engineers don't crack under pressure, they thrive in it. Because while boycotts and protests echo around the world, the money keeps flowing in. Microsoft, Google, same story. They stay or upload a file to the cloud. Ask yourself, was this built in California or in the heart of Silicon Wadi? They expanded. They turned Israel into a second home for innovation. Amazon, from facial recognition companies to 3D sensor startups, many of which are now embedded in iPhones. But here's the twist. Even Apple, known for its secrecy, quietly bought multiple Israeli firms. These companies didn't just invest once, because in Israel, talent is concentrated, competition is fierce, and the culture rewards speed, risk, and failure. It's like Silicon Valley without the bureaucracy, a place where ideas are born, tested, and deployed faster than anywhere else. And because every Israeli startup is forced to think globally, their technology often scales faster. But there is something deeper. Multinational giants aren't just looking for engineers, they're re-looking for edge. And Israel offers that edge in cybersecurity, AI, big data, mobility, defense, tech, but this success raises new questions. How does a nation at constant war maintain such a stable innovation hub? Why do investors pour billions into a place surrounded by enemies? And is the global tech world willing to overlook politics for performance? Why? Because Israel delivers, and because in the eyes of CEOs and VCS, Tel Aviv isn't a conflict zone, it's a launch pad, a pressure cooker where the future gets forged, one innovation at a time. So the next time you use Google Maps, unlock your iPhone. What if the secret to Israel's tech dominance wasn't just brains or funding, but a mindset passed down from generation to generation? What if it wasn't about tech at all, but about how a society views failure, fear, and freedom? In Israel, risk is not optional. It's cultural. From childhood, Israeli kids are taught to challenge authority, question everything, and speak their minds. Even in classrooms, even to their parents, there's no hierarchy of silence. Debate is encouraged, not punished. So when these kids grow up and enter the army at 18, they're not blank slates. They're confident, sharp, used to friction, and then they're thrown into national service where the stakes are real. Life and death, real. That's where grit is forged, not in lectures, but on the ground. But here's where it gets fascinating. Instead of breaking under that pressure, young Israelis emerge from the army stronger, faster, and more decisive than their peers globally. And when they return to civilian life, they don't want routine. They want impact. Why? Because they've already made the rookie mistakes. That's why so many become founders. And here's the twist. In Israel, failing at a startup isn't embarrassing, it's expected. Investors say they prefer second-time founders who've already failed. They're sharper now. This culture, this comfort with failure, is rare in the world. In many countries, failure is shameful. But in Israel, failure is proof that you tried. So what kind of innovation is possible when fear of failure doesn't exist? I now add in the concept of chutzpah, a uniquely Israeli word that means audacity, boldness, nerve. Israelis don't wait for permission, they push boundaries. They ask why, not more than why. And in the startup world, that matters, because disruption starts with defiance. This cultural engine of risk-taking is supercharged by an education system that prioritizes problem-solving over memorization. Israeli schools teach coding earlier than most European countries. Kids enter robotics competitions by age 10. By high school, some are building drones and AI apps. This isn't accidental, it's national strategy. Israel knows it cannot compete with numbers. It must compete with quality, speed, and creativity. Even parents play a role. Israeli parents give their children freedom to fail, responsibility early, and independence young. In fact, it's common to see 10-year-olds navigating cities alone or solving group problems with little adult interference. You can pitch an idea at a cafe, you don't need appointments, just conviction. All of this creates a generation that is fearless, curious, and deeply adaptable. But it doesn't stop there. The tight-knit nature of Israeli society means networking is natural. Everyone knows everyone. Army connections become business partnerships. University classmates become co-founders. There are no layers of bureaucracy. You can text a CEO. And in this high-speed ecosystem, opportunities are created, tested, and either killed or scaled fast. Because while money can buy talent and policy can create opportunity, you can't fake grit. But this raises deeper questions. Can other countries replicate this mindset without the same cultural history? Can freedom and friction exist without existential fear? And that's exactly what Israel has done. Generation after generation. Is Israel's innovation a product of pain? Of a people who've seen loss so deep, they no longer fear losing in business? And what does it mean when a nation weaponizes not just its army, but its attitude? In the end, Israel's cultural DNA, boldness, resilience, relentless optimism, may be its most powerful technology of all. You can't download courage. You have to raise it, test it, and live through it. In a world where wars are no longer fought only with bombs and bullets but with silence, software, and shadow, one country stands at the digital frontline, Israel. But how did this small nation, constantly under threat, quietly become one of the most powerful cyber forces on Earth, respected by allies and tracked by global intelligence agencies? Why are Israeli hackers feared by enemies? It all began with necessity. Because unlike most nations, Israel's wars weren't decades apart. They were years, sometimes weeks, apart. Israel knew the next war would be invisible, fought through satellites, servers, and lines of code, manipulate enemy drones, and defend its infrastructure from millions of cyber attacks daily. And while other countries focused on tanks, trained not in violence, but in algorithms, Unit 8200, the same elite military intelligence unit that trained tech CEOs, also built one of the most advanced cyber arsenals in the world. In 2010, the world was stunned, now a global cybersecurity capital, where students, soldiers, and startup founders work side by side, and labs built next to military bases emerged from this cyber tech ecosystem, sparking intense global debate about surveillance, privacy, and state power. And though the US and Israel never officially claimed responsibility, defenders argue that without these tools, terrorist plots would go undetected, wars would escalate, and lives would be lost. Cybersecurity experts around the world traced its fingerprints back to Israeli intelligence. But this raises chilling questions. NATO sends delegations to study Israeli cyber defense. US generals consult Israeli counterparts on hybrid warfare. By a mysterious computer virus, it's a cyber nation, where warfare is digital, defense is invisible, and innovation is a weapon that destroyed nearly 1,000 Iranian nuclear centrifuges without a single bullet fired. Out of this realization emerged a silent empire of cyber warriors. If wars are now digital, can peace ever be stable? But what exactly does that mean? Now that it holds some of the world's most powerful digital weapons in its hands, it means Israel can intercept digital communications in real time. But what does that mean for the future of conflict? Identify terrorist locations from phone metadata. In fact, Israel is targeted by more cyber attacks per capita than any nation on Earth. Can a virus replace an airstrike? Can one algorithm cause a war or prevent one? As threats evolved, so did Israel's strategy. Why? Because Israel doesn't just play defense. It builds cyber walls and digital swords. And yet, almost none of those attacks succeed. And sometimes, those swords cut deep. It was called Stuxnet, the first true cyber weapon. This was not just hacking, it was digital warfare at nation-state level. Can a single Israeli keyboard crash an enemy's power grid? It opened cyberspark in Beersheba, city once overlooked. Even private firms like NSO Group, infamous for creating the Pegasus. Critics say Israel's cyber tools have been misused by authoritarian governments. But one thing is clear. Israel is no longer just a startup nation. And the world is watching. Tech companies hire Israeli cybersecurity teams to guard their platforms from billion-dollar breaches. In a world where you can't see the battlefield, how do you know you're safe? And if Israel built this cyber empire from necessity, what will it build next? You may not realize it, but Israeli technology is in your pocket, your car, your doctor's office, your bank, and maybe even protecting your life. Ever skipped a traffic jam using Waze? That wasn't built in California. It was coded by former Israeli soldiers using their military mapping expertise to build real-time crowdsourced navigation. Google bought it for over $1 billion, but the brains behind it wore army boots before they wore suits. Ever used Face ID on your iPhone? Apple's facial recognition relies in part on Israeli sensors and algorithms quietly acquired through firms like Prime. And the list doesn't stop there. If your car parks itself or alerts you before a crash, thank Mobileye, the Israeli computer vision company that made self-driving intelligence possible. Bought by Intel for $15.3 billion, Mobileye now powers the future of global mobility. But it's not just civilian tech. One of the most awe-inspiring innovations Israel ever created is the Iron Dome, a missile defense system that tracks incoming rockets in real time, calculates trajectory, and fires an interceptor in less than 2 seconds. With a 90% success rate, engineers, software specialists, and radar scientists, many straight out of the eye, imagine writing code so precise, it saves lives from the sky. But who wrote it? And did you know that hospitals around the world use Rewalk, an Israeli exoskeleton device that helps paraplegics walk again? Or that Orcam, created by the same founders as Mobileye, gives blind people the ability to read the world using a tiny camera and so the next time you open a map, log into a bank app, use a biometric scanner, or see a missile intercepted on live news, ask yourself, even in agriculture, Israel's Netafim pioneered modern drip irrigation, revolutionizing farming in over 110 countries and helping feed millions in water-scarce regions. What else are they working on that we haven't even seen yet? In cybersecurity, companies like Checkpoint and Palo Alto Networks protect governments, banks, and businesses from digital threats every day, and most users never even know it. And in finance, Israeli fintechs are behind encryption tools, fraud detection software, and digital payment systems used by banks from New York to Tokyo. Even your Zoom calls during the pandemic. Some of that infrastructure had Israeli DNA. How much of our modern world is quietly running on Israeli innovation? And if so much of what we use was born in a country smaller than New Jersey? But with great power comes deeper questions. And Israel's rise in the tech world hasn't come without controversy. For all its innovation, global praise, and billion-dollar egg, there is a darker side to the story. What happens when military-grade technology leaks into civilian life, or worse, into the hands of authoritarian regimes? Israeli firms, many born from elite military units, now export some of the most powerful surveillance tools on the planet. Take NSO Group's Pegasus spyware, so sophisticated it can access your phone without you ever clicking a link, turning on your camera and microphone silently. Originally built to fight terrorism, Pegasus was reportedly used by foreign governments to monitor journalists, political dissidents, and even human rights defenders. International watchdogs raised alarms, lawsuits followed, and governments scrambled to investigate. And yet, the code behind it was Israeli. Critics ask, can a democratic state lead global innovation while indirectly enabling digital oppression? Israel's defense ministry claims every export is tightly regulated. But when tools are powerful enough to destabilize regimes or spy on activists, is regulation enough? The line between security and suppression gets blurry fast. And it's not just spy. Israeli facial recognition tech is reportedly used in occupied territories for surveillance, sparking debates about privacy, consent, and the weaponization of data. Meanwhile, international movements like argue that buying from Israeli tech firms indirectly supports occupation and injustice. On the other hand, supporters argue that Israel's technology saves lives. From Iron Dome missile shields protecting civilians to AI systems that detect school shooters before they act. So who decides what's ethical? Can a nation constantly under existential threat afford to build with morality in mind? Or is survival a moral argument in itself? And if we boycott life-saving tech because of its origin, who really suffers? The regime or the patients? The farmers? The blind users? This moral battleground is still unfolding. In boardrooms, courtrooms, and battlefields, Israeli tech forces the world to ask, how do you separate the inventor from the invention? Is technology neutral, or does it always carry the fingerprints of its homeland? And in a world where digital power often outruns the law, who gets to write the rules? One thing is certain. The story of Israel's tech empire isn't just about innovation. It's about influence, ethics, and responsibility. And it's far from over. If Israel built its past on survival, it's now building its future on possibility. Bold, unapologetic, and limitless. While most countries still race to catch up with today's tech, Israel is already coding tomorrow. And the next battlefield is not just cyberspace or silicon chips. It's consciousness, biology, and the stars. In artificial intelligence, Israeli labs are pushing the boundaries of neural networks, autonomous machines, and decision-making algorithms that can operate faster than human reflex. In Tel Aviv and Haifa, AI programs are diagnosing diseases before symptoms appear, predicting financial collapses before the first trade, and training defense systems to respond before threats are even launched. Israeli AI is already being used in hospitals in the US, Europe, and Asia to detect strokes and cancers in seconds. But the deeper future lies in biotech, where Israeli startups are rewriting the code of life itself, creating lab-grown organs, gene-editing treatments for rare diseases, and personalized cancer vaccines using predictive genomics. Imagine a future where your entire medical history is reduced to a strand of data analyzed and updated in real time by a system designed in a Jerusalem lab. Israel is also building quantum communications infrastructure, exploring ways to make information literally unhackable. And as nations look to the stars, Israel is quietly preparing to join them, launching nanosatellites, building lunar landers, and experimenting with space-based solar energy. Their SpaceYield mission in 2019 may have crash-landed on the moon, but it marked the first privately funded mission ever to reach lunar orbit. From a country with no space agency in the traditional sense, that same ambition is fueling the next generation. Israeli schools now teach children not only how to use AI, but how to build it. Defense contractors are prototyping autonomous drones that can coordinate like swarms of insects, and biotech firms are exploring brain-computer interfaces that let paralyzed patients control devices with thought alone. But the most fascinating shift, Israel is starting to export not just products, but philosophy, a way of thinking. Fail fast, ask everything, trust young minds, break the mold. Global universities now study Israel's innovation model. Countries are replicating its military T-academic triangle, and startups around the world are adopting Israeli-style accelerators that compress 6 months of growth into 6 weeks. The question now is no longer how did Israel get here? It's where is it going next? Will it lead in curing cancer? Will it build the cybersecurity backbone of the next global internet? Will it help defend democracy, or unintentionally empower authoritarian regimes through its tools? Will it send citizens into orbit, or plug their minds directly into machines? One thing is certain, Israel is not slowing down. In fact, its most powerful inventions may still be invisible, being tested in labs, bunkers, and bedrooms across the country right now. Because in Israel, the future isn't something you wait for, it's something you build, urgently, fearlessly, and always ahead of the world. So now that you've seen the story, not just of a nation but of an idea, ask yourself, what does it really mean to be advanced? Is it having the fastest chips or the deepest code? Or is it building something when you have nothing? No oil, no peace, no rest from war, and still choosing to invent, to rise, to disrupt. Israel's journey from survival to supremacy is not just a technological miracle. It's a psychological one, a mindset forged in conflict, accelerated by fear, sharpened by failure, and weaponized through hope. From irrigation pipes in the Negev desert to satellites orbiting the moon, from refugee camps to cybersecurity bunkers, this country has rewritten what's possible and what's permissible. But here's the question no one wants to ask. Can innovation ever truly be innocent? Can a nation that builds weapons and medicine in the same lab separate ethics from genius? Can the same drones that save lives also spy on them? Can we love the tech and still question its origin? Maybe the real answer lies not in Israel, but in us. The world that consumes its creations, funds its unicorns, copies its models, and debates its morality. Because Israel's story isn't just about startups, it's about the cost of speed, the price of brilliance, the shadow behind the spotlight. And yet, despite every controversy, every threat, every line crossed and lesson learned, Israel keeps building because it must, because that's how it breathes. So as you close this video, ask yourself, what kind of future are we building? And who do we trust to build it? Maybe the next big breakthrough won't come from Silicon Valley, but from a basement in Tel Aviv, a bunker near Haifa, or a teenager who just left the army. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest weapon of the 21st century is not a missile, or a virus, or a war. Maybe it's an idea, and in Israel, ideas move faster than fear.